Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Brothers Discuss. I'm Alex,
And I am Chris.
and we have come to bargain.
Uh,
Yes, that's right. We are talking about Doctor Strange, our little retrospective, discussion on all things Doctor Strange, the 2016 film. So, I guess I'll start. Great movie. I love it, and I
mhm.
love Wong. So, what about you?
yeah, this was a movie going into it, like, I really wasn't too excited for. Like, for no apparent reason, like, I'm just not the biggest Doctor Strange fan, or I wasn't at the time. And so I wasn't that hyped up, especially because the last movie was Civil War. And so, like, going off of that, now you have Doctor Strange. I was like, okay, I mean, sure. And then watching it was so much. It was so good, and it's a really fun, exciting movie. Visually gorgeous. It is easily one of the best, if not the best looking Marvel movie in my opinion. And yeah, and the story is amazing. I love it.
I will say I'll sort of meet halfway with some of the people that do have criticisms of the film, and those criticisms are like it's a familiar story. It's the character arc of Doctor Strange and Iron Man are pretty similar.
Sure, sure.
There's that, and, and there's a few things. I'll meet halfway with a few of those. Like I think my biggest problem with the movie, I'll get the negatives out of the way first, then I'll go into the positive territory.
Okay.
I feel the movie should have been, funnily enough, Stranger, but I still think it's great.
I think for an
Uh,
origin movie, it really works. Like I think Multiverse of Madness is going to be crazy. One, because you have Sam Raimi directing and he's got that crazy mind that you would want for like a superhero horror film.
mhm.
But two, it's just because you've established who this character is and where his place is in this whole universe. You kind of need
Yeah,
the origin movie to be that way, and then you start getting into the more crazy character.
absolutely. See, I think the sequence where he's introduced to the mystical arts and he's sent on that completely crazy trip of psychedelic imagery and all that kind of Steve Ditko-esque imagery, like I think that's the best part of the movie because it is
Mhm.
so absurd and so out there and so wacky.
Yeah,
And yet I felt that the movie still felt somewhat, familiar in terms of its story.
right.
I like Benedict Cumberbatch, but that arc is very similar, is very familiar. And I felt
Sure.
that even though I admire that each action scene has a very varied set of action mechanics, it's like a different set of powers or whatever. They still find a way to ground these sequences in really mundane, bland locations to the point where it still felt like some of the movie was bland.
Sure.
Now that that's out of the way, um, or just a few more things. In some ways, it does feel like, even though this is like towards the beginning of phase three still of the MCU, it does feel in some ways like a phase one origin movie. It's similar to
Yeah.
Iron Man and Thor. It's similar to those movies actually. Doctor Strange is relatively light on plot and much more concerned about character world building. And it makes sense because like you alluded to, like despite, at this point, the audience has already been accustomed to, superheroes, monsters, scientific experiments, artificial intelligence, aliens, and like size changers. Like
Yeah.
sorcery is a whole other level of the MCU and Marvel in general. Like there's a
Yeah.
whole Illuminati in the Marvel comics that I'm
Yeah.
quite
Yeah.
certain Doctor Strange is a part of. Um, so it makes sense to ease audiences into this with a plot that isn't wholly complicated.
Hmm.
And, despite Tony Stark and Stephen Strange having nearly identical origin stories, as well as very similar facial hair, I'm just saying, the two characters themselves do feel different enough to prevent them from being clones in the same universe.
Oh yeah, and that especially collides in Infinity War.
Yeah, absolutely. With Tony Stark, we had a character with like severe abandonment issues, using his fame to fill the massive emotional void in his literally damaged heart. With Stephen Strange, this is a man who lives or dies based on his own personal reputation. Much like Cumberbatch's interpretation of Sherlock Holmes, like he has a compulsive need to work, but
Hmm.
he tries to balance that by tackling surgeries that he knows will get him recognition and he knows that he can accomplish. Like this is a man with a pathological fear of failure. But one reason he struggles with the mystic arts initially is his inability to fully dedicate himself to superstition, just in case he is wrong and is unable to master it. And this actually makes for one of the most interesting character arcs in any of the Marvel movies in terms of how the narrative takes a character flaw and literally forces the protagonist to face it head on. Like case in point, like Stevens needs to face the idea of failure over and over and over again in the film's final confrontation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But like the finale is brilliant. I guess we could just jump to that real quick. I love the finale. I think that's
Oh yeah,
a very clever twist to the kinds we've seen.
yeah, absolutely.
Anything you want to add about Dormammu?
Yeah, so not really too important in the actual movie. It was kind of like a little last minute cameo, but the scene itself was great. A, for the fact that it is hilarious. Dormammu, I've come to bargain, is one of my favorite lines ever.
Past. I love that we got a really faithful adaptation of the origin, and it's a great way to make a first Doctor Strange film just in the future. And I don't like using that as an excuse for them not doing it here. I think that's always a cop out, but at the same time, I know the world that Marvel set up in their film, so I expect things to get a little bit weirder the more he's in tune with his powers. And in this film, he was at a very basic level here, so I was kind of okay with not going full Doctor Strange in this film, in hindsight.
Yeah.
But yet, I have a lot of fun with this movie. I actually saw this multiple times in theaters. I enjoyed it every single time I watched it. I never got sick of it. I just think this film really works, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Oh yeah.
Any supporting cast members you want to give a shout out to in this?
Benedict Wong as Wong is I mean,
Yes.
Wong is great, and yeah. um I'm trying to think of like
The Cloak of Levitation is amazing.
oh yeah.
One of my favorite moments in this film is like when the cloak starts like fighting that guy, and then like Doctor Strange goes off somewhere. Then like he's gone for like 5 minutes, but then he comes back, and the cloak is still fighting that guy.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
amazing. I bet the cloak could lift Thor's hammer. I bet it's
Probably.
worthy. I'll give a shout out to Tilda Swinton as the
Oh,
Ancient
yeah,
One.
yeah.
Yeah, she's a brilliant presence as the Ancient One. I'm glad we got to see her again in Avengers Endgame because she subverts the wise sensei trope and makes it feel more grounded, but without losing humanity or authority.
Right.
And I also do want to give a shout out to, I'm going to butcher his name, Chiwetel Ejiofor. How do you say his name? The guy that plays Mordo.
Mordo. I don't know how to say it.
I'm terribly sorry. I think he's one of the greatest actors working today, but like I think Mordo gets a compelling arc in this film.
Hmm.
He's someone who has spent his whole life trying to follow the teachings of the Ancient One and trying to be as morally righteous as possible, only to have his entire worldview shattered. And
Yeah.
how he deals with the fallout of the events of this film, I'm sure going to play a huge part in the sequel.
Absolutely.
As is alluded to in the after credit scene. Yeah. Can we talk about the score real quick? The elephant in the
Yeah.
room that is the score by Michael Giacchino. I'll go ahead and say that, yeah, I know lots of people have said this, but I will say that I think the soundtrack is way too close to the Star Trek soundtrack.
Yeah, and Michael Giacchino, he's a really great composer, but like when you hear his different works,
Yeah, he's done better. The theme, the quote unquote Doctor Strange theme that plays over the credits, is very close to his own Star Trek theme, and it's funny because in 2016 he composed Star Trek, Doctor Strange, and Rogue One all in the same year. So we heard a lot from him in 2016.
He basically exploded that year. Everyone kind of knew him from Star Trek, but I think he's done really great work in the past. Like Inside Out, for instance, that's a great score.
oh yeah,
but there are certain parts of the Doctor Strange score that I actually genuinely love. Like when everything is going backwards in time. Like there's music
the music is going backwards
that
too.
almost sounds like it sounds like it's going backwards. Like he does this certain thing, and I just thought that was super clever and added to the atmosphere. And I figured out that's what I was hearing. I was like, wow, like that was super clever.
Oh yeah, and let's talk about the action scenes in this movie because this is like the sequences in this movie are incredibly innovative. Like you have the mirror dimension sequence in New York, which is probably my favorite in the whole movie. You mentioned earlier, like Strange is kind of going through this acid trip of whatever.
Hands on top of hands.
Yeah.
Like, there's some really like out of this world imagery in that sequence.
Yeah, and it's definitely, out of this world compared to like what we're used to in a Marvel movie. And the sorcery world is incredibly unique to Marvel. And I'm really looking forward to see more of that in Doctor Strange 2.
In the hands of Sam Raimi.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. And I'm glad this was nominated for special effects at the Oscars that year because I did think that the city folding stuff was so cool and so creative.
Yeah.
And when people say, oh, it's Inception on crack, I mean, they're not wrong, but there's all these little things like, where the fighting takes place like in real time, but the exploding environment around like the combatants is going backwards in time and repairing itself.
It's nuts.
Like it's just like little things like that are just really, really cool.
Absolutely.
And, just talk about other things. Like I really liked, once again as a fan, like when you figure out like, oh, those are the Sanctum Santorums. Like, oh, that's the Eye of Agamotto. And when he finally mentions Dormammu, like all these things, we go like, oh, cool. Like they're doing all this already. Like it felt like a classic Doctor Strange comic to me.
Let's talk about Caecilius and how he's maybe one of the more generic MCU villains.
He's not like Malekith, who's just so bland and so boring. He kind of has a little bit of like enthusiasm to him, but like he is, compared to other villains we've had at this point, and the villains that we're going to get after this, which I think Phase 3 is kind of like the golden age of Marvel villains.
Yeah, and I'll go and say right now, I think Phase 3 is still to this day so far my favorite phase of the MCU overall.
Right.
I mean, we're still barely into Phase 4, but so we'll see what happens once that's all wrapped up.
Yeah.
But yeah, Caecilius, he's not a terrible villain, but he mainly exists to be a threat for the heroes to face.
Pretty much, yeah.
Like he gets a few decent moments of intimidation and humor, but it feels like he's a plot device first as opposed to an interesting foe for Doctor Strange to go up against. Like he's supposed to be an arrogant former pupil of the Ancient One, which is why she's initially reluctant to train Steven. But because we don't see any of that prior relationship, it's a parallel that doesn't amount to anything. It's just a wasted opportunity in regards to both the the villain and also another how do I phrase this? Another like I guess casualty of the film is Rachel McAdams.
Yeah.
Yeah, she gets very little to do in this film.
It's actually a gag in the film that like you see her one time in the hospital and then the next time you see her she's doing the exact same thing.
Yeah,
and, like,
pretty
the plot
much.
is doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, it's a shame because Rachel McAdams is a really great actress.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, besides that, I guess those are the weakest. If I could pinpoint like the supporting, because I do think it's a really great cast overall, but in terms of like giving them something to do, Rachel McAdams and Mads Mikkelsen, I'd say, are the ones that suffer the most.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to talk about?
Um, I think we got everything. Post-credit scene, Thor and Doctor
Oh
Strange
yeah.
team up that ends up being 2 minutes long.
That's right. Um, Obviously, it's a clip from Thor Ragnarok, directed by Taika Waititi. And yeah, I mean, it's just this a typical sort of post-credit scene that some MCU films have done where they just show a clip of the film, of the upcoming
Yeah.
film. Though there's slightly different takes in this post-credit scene than what ended up in Thor Ragnarok. If you notice carefully.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Only to end up being a 2 minute sequence, which whatever. I mean, it's
but
still
to be
has.
fair, though, when we talk about this in Ragnarok, it's like one of my favorite scenes in
Oh, I mean,
anything
yeah,
ever.
it's a great scene. Don't get me wrong, but it's like I kind of want a little bit more.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Yeah, and we also get to see his yellow gloves that from the
that
comics that we
unfortunately
never,
disappear.
which I'm actually kind of glad about in a way because I kind of like. Um, there's a moment I'll talk about in Infinity War that I actually like, and the reason why I prefer him not having the gloves. You know the moment in Infinity War when Doctor Strange surrenders the Time Stone to
And you see
Thanos.
you
You can
see
see his handshake.
yeah. Not
Like,
only that, you can see like the surgery on his hands too.
yeah, yeah. It's just a constant reminder of just how damaged his hands are and why he's in this in the first place.
Yeah.
Like, so I'm personally fine with him not having the gloves as much as I I like the gloves in Thor
Right.
Ragnarok. I am glad that we do have that reminder that he is a damaged man.
Hmm.
So yeah, there we go. We talked about two future MCU films right here.
Yeah.
But is that it for Doctor Strange now?
Think so. Yeah.
So do you want to just jump straight to grades?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. I'm gonna give this movie. I'll go first this time. Change pace.
All
I'll give
right.
this an 8 out of 10. How
I'll be
about
right
you?
there too. Yeah, I'll also put an 8
Nice. Look at us, neck and neck.
again.
Again, once again. All right. So I guess we'll wrap it up here. So thank you everyone for listening, and stay tuned for our next discussion, which will of course be on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. So that should be an interesting conversation because I've got some things to say about that film. So look out for that. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye.